You demolished my grandfather's bridge, so I took down her $5.5 million resort. The old dam's rusted wheel creaked as I slowly turned it. Water level, 30%. 20%. 10%. With every notch, Lake West receded, and with it, Victoria's empire crumbled. For 2 decades, this HOA president ruled with an iron fist, crushing dissent with wealth and influence. She had the courts in her pocket, the police on speed dial. She controlled everything. Everything except the dam. When she flattened my family's 70-year-old bridge in the dead of night, she made one fatal error. She didn't bother to ask who owned the dam's controls. Want to know how a simple wooden footbridge led to the most costly act of revenge in Texas history? Drop a comment with where you're watching from. 2 weeks before it all began, I was doing what I always did, checking on the cattle early in the morning. The Texas sun was already baking the land by 7 a.m., casting that piercing white light that makes you squint, even behind dark sunglasses. That's when I noticed it, or more accurately, didn't notice it. The bridge was missing. Not damaged, not in disrepair, completely erased. Shattered wooden beams littered the shore like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my grandfather's last legacy. My hands trembled as I opened the security camera feed on my phone. The timestamp flashed 3:17 a.m. The footage showed heavy machinery in action, with zero effort to be discreet. The excavator's claw swung deliberately, again and again, smashing the bridge into rubble. And printed boldly on the machine's side, Davenport Development Group. I sat frozen in my truck, gripping an old photo from my wallet so tightly my knuckles turned white. Me at 8 years old, standing with Grandpa Joe on that very bridge, fishing rods in hand, both of us smiling like kings. Someday, this'll be yours, Caleb, he had told me that day. Take care of it better than I did. The anger inside me wasn't the fiery kind, it was cold and calculated, the kind that waits for its moment. About an hour later, my neighbor Silas Croft found me still sitting by the ruins, like a mourner at a grave. Silas, a retired engineer now in his 70s, had worked side by side with Grandpa for years before settling on the ranch next door. He looked over the wreckage with those keen, weathered eyes of his, then turned his gaze to the lake with an unreadable expression. Your grandfather's bridge was just one piece of the puzzle, Silas said quietly, choosing his words as if walking through a minefield. The early light cast shadows across his lined face as he turned fully toward me. Joe used to control the entire water system, every valve, every channel. He built all of it himself. That bridge. It was only the part you could see. I didn't press for more, not yet. I was too angry, too raw. But something about the way he said it stuck with me, like he was giving me a clue for later. That evening, I attended the Westridge Homeowners Association meeting, held in their modern, sterile community center, all glass, steel, and corporate coldness. I walked in, still in work boots and dusty jeans, feeling every eye in the room judge me like I didn't belong. At the front, Victoria Davenport sat like royalty at her throne. Immaculate silver hair, razor-sharp smile, tailored designer suit. She radiated power and smugness. Mr. Hayes, she purred as I stepped up to the microphone during the public comments. What can we help you with tonight? Her voice dripped with false sweetness. She already knew why I was there, and she was enjoying it. You can explain why your company demolished the bridge on my land, I said, keeping my tone steady, though fury churned just beneath the surface. I've got video showing your equipment tearing it down at 3:17 this morning. She didn't even flinch. That smug smile just grew wider. Oh, that old liability? She replied, feigning boredom. Per our maintenance agreement, any structure deemed hazardous to the community must be removed. Surely you received the notice? What notice? What agreement? I asked, already feeling the trap spring shut. The one your grandfather signed back in 1998, she said smoothly, motioning to her assistant. He handed her a folder with perfect theatrical flair. All properties bordering the community lake are subject to it. Page 12. Subsection 4A gives the HOA full authority to eliminate dangerous structures. Would you like to take a look? The document she handed over felt off the moment it touched my hands. The paper looked artificially weathered. The font wasn't quite right for something supposedly printed in the late '90s. And that signature? I'd seen Grandpa Joe's handwriting hundreds of times, and this was a poor imitation. But standing there, surrounded by 40 icy stares, I had no way to prove it wasn't real. Just a forged document making it all seem legal. That bridge was in no way unsafe, I insisted, already knowing I was losing ground. I maintained it annually. It passed inspection just last spring. Victoria chuckled a cold, glass-breaking sound. Our structural engineer saw it differently. His report noted several safety violations, she said with a smirk. But if you'd rather repay the HOA for the demolition, that's certainly an option. She paused dramatically. I believe the total comes to $18,000. Will that be cash or check? The other board members squirmed in their seats but kept their mouths shut. I recognized the signs. They were either paid off or too scared to speak. Roger Steinbeck, who'd once sold my grandfather lumber for the bridge, wouldn't meet my gaze. Janet Chen, whose kids I taught to fish off that very dock, stared at her hands like they held the answer to everything. This isn't finished, I told her, my voice calmer than I felt. Not even close. I walked out, her condescending eyes burning into my back. Behind me, I heard her resume the meeting like nothing had happened. Now, about the Phase 3 expansion of the Lakeside Resort and Spa Broken Bar. That night, I sat in Grandpa's old study, surrounded by dusty boxes of paperwork I'd never gone through. If Victoria wanted to play the paperwork game, then so be it. I could play too. I found the old metal document box buried beneath decades of tax files, wrapped in a sheet of oilcloth like something sacred. Inside were Grandpa's original engineering plans, spread across the desk like a battle map. Each page was filled with his meticulous notes, detailed diagrams, and handwritten calculations. The pages were covered in meticulous handwriting of technical notes, calculations, measurements. But one warning jumped out at me. Written in red ink and underlined 3 times, main valve A, do not operate if water level exceeds 70%. This wasn't some basic irrigation layout. It was a blueprint for a sophisticated dam system designed to control every drop flowing into Lake West. Pipes, valves, spillways, of every component calculated, engineered, and built by my grandfather himself. And if these plans were accurate, a broken bar, I didn't just inherit a bridge. I inherited the whole dam system, water rights, operational control, everything. Which meant Victoria Davenport hadn't just destroyed a bridge, she had declared war on the man who could drain her luxury resort dry with a single turn of a valve. But having the power was one thing. The real question was, did I have the guts to use it? Victoria had wealth, influence, and a small army of lawyers. All I had was a dusty box of my grandfather's papers and a storm of righteous fury. So here's the real fight. Could a forgotten legacy beat a multi-million-dollar empire? Monday, 6 a.m. The water stopped. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. The faucet sputtered, coughed, and fell silent. Same in the bathroom. Same in the barn. Troughs were empty. Pipes bone dry. Out the window, I watched the sprinklers at Victoria's resort dance in the morning sun like nothing had changed, their mist forming cheerful rainbows. The message was clear: submit a broken bar or suffer. I stepped out onto the porch and called the water company. Sorry, Mr. Hayes, the customer service rep said, sounding genuinely sorry. Looks like your service was suspended due to non-payment of HOA fees. The words hit like a punch to the ribs. What fees? I'm not part of the HOA. My land's been here 60 years longer than Westridge ever existed. Pause. Keyboard clicking. Then, I'm seeing a lien filed by Westridge HOA. $43,000 in back assessments. Penalties dating back to 1998. My grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. This is a mistake. My grandfather never joined any HOA. But even as I said it, that forged document from the meeting came back to haunt me. I'm sorry, sir, the rep continued. Until the issue's resolved with the HOA, we're required to suspend your service. After I hung up, I noticed the black SUV parked at the end of my driveway. Engine running. Tinted windows. Watching. It had been the yesterday, and the day before. That night, the harassment began. Victoria called them security patrols. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "Just a precaution. There's been vandalism, you understand." Private guards in tactical gear began circling my land. All night, every hour, LED spotlights swept across my windows like searchlights at a prison. Even with blackout curtains, the light got in. My dogs barked themselves hoarse. Sleep was impossible. "This is for the safety of the community," Victoria had said with a shrug, examining her manicured nails as if I were beneath her notice. "You destroyed my bridge," I snapped. "You're the one causing damage." She looked up, her eyes cold and flat. "Mr. Hayes, everything we've done is within our legal rights. If you can't handle the responsibility of land ownership, a broken bar, perhaps you should consider selling. I know several developers who'd be very interested in your property." Then it was the real motive. It was never about safety, never about rules. They wanted my land. That night, I stood alone in the rain, fists clenched as the lights swept across my property again. Mud soaked through my boots. My jacket clung to me like wet paper. But I didn't go inside. Inside felt like surrender. The next morning, salvation came in a beat-up Honda Civic. Ava China, my best friend since high school, now the sharpest lawyer in 3 counties, took one look at me and got to work. Her documents spread across my kitchen table. She brewed bottled water coffee while cross-referencing zoning maps and permit records like she was built for this exact moment. "Caleb," she said, tapping her laptop screen, "look at this." The map showed the lakeside resort zoned for commercial recreation since 2015. But right in the middle where the main resort building stood there was a blank zone, a hole in the paperwork. "They either built on land they don't properly own," Ava said, "or they're hiding something." I pulled out the metal box of Grandpa's papers and laid the damn blueprints beside her laptop. Ava whistled low. "Caliber broken bar, this isn't just a ranch water system." "I know," I said. "This is the whole lake." She nodded, eyes gleaming with the thrill of a legal war she knew we could win. "Without this dam," she said, "there is no lake. And without the lake, Victoria's resort is just an overpriced monument to arrogance." I scanned the faded ink and red markings. Most were specks. But one note near the main valve was stark and final: water level critical. Do not engage without full system check. We weren't just sitting on leverage. We were sitting on a legacy, a weapon, a warning, and it was time to decide if we were going to use it. Beyond 70% annual inspection mandatory. Emergency release protocol AC appendix. But there was no appendix, just carefully torn edges where pages had once been. Someone had deliberately removed them. In the margins, that same ominous red ink returned: main valve absolutely no operation if water level exceeds 70%. Why would he write that? I muttered aloud. What happens if the level gets too high? Ava studied the blueprints with a furrowed brow. Could be structural, she said. Or maybe a broken bar. She trailed off, lost in thought. Maybe he knew someone would try to weaponize it. That night, sleep was impossible. The sweeping beams of the security spotlights carved through the darkness like accusations. I stood at my grandfather's grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy, the night thick with tension. The brass nameplate gleamed faintly under the moonlight: Joseph Hayes, 1925 2010. "What were you trying to protect, Grandpa?" I whispered. "What secret was so important you had to bury it in warnings and silence?" I thought about the red ink, the warnings, the meticulous notes. My grandfather hadn't been careless. Every choice he made had a purpose, which meant those warnings weren't caution, they were protection. Back inside, Ava was still at the kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of empty coffee cups and open documents. "We need to be careful," she said without looking up. "Victoria Davenport didn't build her empire by playing fair. If she finds out the kind of leverage you're sitting on, she'll escalate." She flipped her screen to show a highlighted section of the county records. "She's been planning this expansion for years. Caleb, your ranch is the last piece she needs." As if to confirm her words, My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Final offer coming tomorrow. Be smart, Hayes. I showed it to Ava. She took a photo without hesitation. They're getting desperate, she said, a glint in her eye. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. But as the spotlight swept across my window again, I wasn't sure who was more desperate, Victoria with her Impera broken bar or me with a dam I couldn't touch without risking disaster. My inheritance was a swordy one with a blade on both edges. And the boldest warning of all, absolutely no operation. Could I bet everything in my land, my freedom on a system even my grandfather feared to use? At dawn, I made my move. I launched my drone into the copper sky. Its quiet buzz slicing through the still morning air. Below, the lakeside resort gleamed like a polished lie. Infinity pools, spa domes, and that gaudy monstrosity of a lodge that looked like a golden shopping mall. But I wasn't sightseeing. Near the maintenance area, partially hidden behind manicured hedges and faux boulders, I found a massive pipe. The drone's camera zoomed in. The pipe spewed water directly into Lake West Ridge. But the water wasn't clean. It shimmered with an oily sheen, rainbow colors swirling on the surface like a chemical painting. I looped back, capturing it from multiple angles. The resort logo was visible in every frame. By noon, the video was live. Lakeside Resort dumping unknown substances into our water. The headline hit local forums like a grenade. Shares skyrocketed. 50A broken bar, 100A broken bar, 300 in the first hour. Comments flooded in, parents panicking over kids who swam in the lake. Fishermen talking about fewer fish. A woman who said her dog got sick. Someone else claimed they'd seen similar discharges late at night. The hornet's nest wasn't just stirred, it was set ablaze. Victoria struck back fast. The process server cornered me at the feed store, shoving a thick envelope into my hands before walking away. You've been served, he muttered. A $100,000 defamation lawsuit. The number stared at me like a joke written in fire. And the real kicker? Attached was a fresh water quality report from Ecotist Laboratories, dated the day before my video went live. Result: lake water pristine. Exceeds all federal standards. She was ready, prepared. She had expected this. That report was probably filed before I'd even touched my drone. That night, I met Ava at her office. Her normally spotless desk was a disaster of papers everywhere, sticky notes, printouts in messy stacks. She fabricated it, Ava said without even greeting me. Ecotist Labs is owned by a Davenport shell company. She's grading her own homework. Then her eyes lit up with something deeper of indication. But that's not even the best part. She grabbed two documents and laid them side by side. Remember that a maintenance agreement she waved around, the one supposedly signed by your grandfather? On one side, Victoria's version. On the other, a stamped original from 1998 that the county clerk had helped Ava locate. Even I could see the differences. The signature on Victoria's was closely broken bar but wrong. The slant, the loops, the pressure off. The typeface wasn't consistent with the era, and most damning of all, entire sections granting her authority missing from the original. She didn't just forge it, Ava said. She manufactured an entire document out of thin air to give herself power she never had. I stared at the proof. This is huge, I whispered, for the first time daring to believe we might win. Ava was already pulling up more files. Oh, it gets better. She zoomed in on two more permits, one from 2015, one from 2018. See these signatures? She said. Supposedly the same official signed both, but look, a completely different handwriting. Then she clicked again, revealing a final document. Guess who signed off on the building in that zoning gap? Then it was Victoria Davenport's own Namia, listed as a community development officer. A position, Ava said, that doesn't even exist in our county. She made up a fake government job, I said slowly, just to approve her own construction. Ava leaned back in her chair, that dangerous smile spreading across her face. And better yet, she said, I think she built it on public land. That land was supposed to be preserved. Ava said quietly. Part of the watershed protection zone. The only reason it looked buildable was because of your grandfather's dam. Without it keeping the lake level high, the entire area would revert to seasonal wetlands. She needed that water level, I realized aloud. To keep the lie afloat. My phone rang, cutting through the moment. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Mr. Hayes? The voice was young, nervous. Please don't hang up. I know Victoria Davenport. Really know her. I have something that might help you. But yeah, broken bar, I can't be involved. Not publicly. Can we meet? Ava shook her head vigorously, mouthing, "It's a trap." But I'd gone too far to turn back now. Who is this? I asked, my voice hard. Someone who's watched her ruin too many good people. That's all I can say right now. Tomorrow night. Old truck stop on Highway 12. Come alone. The line went dead. Ava immediately launched into objections, but I raised a hand to stop her. I know it's risky. But what if it's real? What if someone finally had enough? She exhaled in frustration. Then let me at least bug your truck. If this goes sideways, I want evidence. We spent the next hour preparing contingency plans. But even as we reviewed them, my mind kept circling back to that voice. You afraid, but resolute. Who in Victoria's inner circle would risk everything to help me? That night, I sat with Ava's stack of evidence, forged documents, invented job titles, illegal construction on public land, each piece damning on its own. Together, they painted a picture of decades-long corruption. She hadn't just bent the rules as she'd rewritten them, and no one had stopped her. That meant she had protection at every level. Judges, inspectors, law enforcement. How deep did her reach go? My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Bring a flash drive. You'll want to save what I show you. Another message followed. She destroyed my family too. Time for justice. I stared out at the lake, the sweep of the security lights tracing slow arcs over the property. My grandfather's warnings echoed in my head. He hadn't just left me a dam. He'd left me a legacy. Victoria had built her empire on lies, on stolen ground and silenced voices. But every empire built on sand eventually faces the tide. She'd filed a $100,000 lawsuit. But I was sitting on something bigger, a secret that could collapse her entire empire. It wasn't about who was right anymore. It was about who would move first. The lawsuit papers sat on my kitchen table, thick and heavy like coiled venom. $100,000. More money than I could earn in 2 years of honest ranching. That evening, I sat by the lake as the sun dropped behind the hills. You left me a weapon, Grandpa, I whispered to the water. But what good is a weapon I can't use? The lake didn't answer. It kept its secrets. Across the water, the resort's lights lit up like a constellation. Beautiful. False. A lie in every sparkle. Then came the alert. Motion detected near the equipment shed. I opened the feed. 2 figures in dark clothing. One with bolt cutters, the other with a small camera. They moved with practiced confidence. A professional. Deliberate. Not thieves. Victoria's next move. I wanted to storm out with my shotgun, but Ava's voice stopped me. Don't give them what they want. I called 911 and began recording the feed from every device I owned. Sirens came half an hour later, far too slow for a property so close to town. By then, the men were gone. But they hadn't gotten inside. And I had crystal clear footage of their faces and their vehicle. Probably just kids, Sheriff Martinez muttered, barely glancing at the footage. His disinterest said everything I needed to know. After he left, I uploaded the video to 3 cloud backups and sent copies to Ava. Victoria wanted to play dirty. Fine. I'd document every move. Then my phone rang again. Ava's voice came fast and bright. Caleb, I've been digging through the water rights filings. Your grandfather didn't just file them right, he filed them perfectly. I stood frozen as she continued. Every detail holds up. You have complete legal authority over that dam. The rights predate the resort, the HOA, even the town's incorporation. So if I needed to broken bar lower the water level? I asked. Totally within your rights, Ava confirmed. In fact, the inspection protocols he filed recommend it. Drop it to 30% for structural review. I closed my eyes, Understanding the implications. That drop would expose everything. A boat docks left stranded, swimming beaches turned to cracked mud, and worst of all for Victoria, illegal foundations laid bare. But Caleb, Ava warned, her voice more serious than ever. This is a nuclear option. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. That night, I drove to Silas's workshop. The old engineer had his own set of blueprints laid out, notes scribbled in the margins in pencil. The war had begun, and I finally understood what my grandfather had left me. Not a dam, a lever, a means to bring the whole crooked thing down. Silas had spread the dam blueprints across his workbench, annotated in a dozen colors. I helped your grandfather with these modifications back in '98, he said, running a gnarled finger along a cluster of lines I hadn't noticed before. He knew this day might come. New developers would come knocking, trying to push him out. So he built in a little insurance. He pointed at a set of secondary valves or auxiliary controls, hidden in plain sight. With these, you can manage the flow precisely. Lower it gradually, and it looks like normal seasonal changes. But if you drop it faster, he didn't need to finish. The 70% warning, I prompted. What happens if we release above that? Silas's expression darkened. The hydrostatic pressure on the main valve above 70% is immense. Opening it too soon would be like popping a champagne cork the size of a small house. That surge could do real damage downstream. He leaned back, eyes serious. Your grandfather added that warning after the '93 floods. Below 70%, the pressure's manageable. Still faster but controlled. Well, a broken bar as controlled as it gets when you're draining a lake. I thought of the resort, the artificial beaches, the fragile illusion. At its current level, even a controlled release would look like catastrophe. On my drive home, Ava called with a final piece of the puzzle. I scheduled an emergency home meeting for tomorrow night, she said. Told them you have documentation about the dam and water rights they're legally required to review. Victoria has to attend. It's in the bylaws. Everything was aligning. A security footage, forged documents, evidence of illegal construction, and now legal authority. That night, I stood at my grandfather's grave under a sky full of stars. I get it now, I whispered. You didn't just leave me land. You left me the power to protect it. Tomorrow, Victoria would either back down or push things to the breaking point. Either way, the water would follow its true course. And if she forced my hand, I'd remind her, every empire built on lies eventually faces the flood. The only question was whether she'd be smart enough to retreat. I didn't think so. Her pride wouldn't let her. Everything was ready. One turn of the valve would change everything. Just to see a broken bar or our own undoing. Morning arrived cloaked in mist, the lake still and silver in the cold dawn. I stood at the dam's control station with Silas beside me, our breath visible in the air. The gauge reads 65% A, just beneath the danger zone. I laid my hands on the release wheel, its metal cold and pitted with age. This is it, Silas said. You sure? She had her chance, I said, remembering Victoria's reaction at last night's meeting. She had laughed at the evidence, called it all fabricated nonsense from a desperate man, threatened to file criminal charges for harassment. She wanted a fight, she'd get one. Together, Silas and I began to turn the valves, his hands steady from years of experience, mine driven by purpose. The engineer who helped design the system, and the grandson tasked with using it. The wheels groaned in protest, metal on metal after years of stillness. Then the deep internal rumble began, ancient arteries waking up. The water level gauge ticked downward. 64% A, broken bar 63%. The change was subtle at first. The lake's surface lost its mirror finish. New currents stirred. Small whirlpools formed near the dam's outflow points. Then the shift accelerated. 60% A, broken bar 55%. The waterline began to retreat visibly, like a curtain being pulled back to reveal a hidden stage. And what a stage it was! First came the fence liners, rotting wooden posts breaking the surface like skeletal fingers. Then, concrete foundations, remnants of structures long buried beneath the reservoir. But the real shock came near the resort. Past the 45% mark, something massive breached the surface. Concrete pillars, steel rebar, the unmistakable outline of buildings that never should have existed. Victoria had extended her resort into the lake itself far beyond what any permits allowed, counting on the water to keep her secret submerged. But now, the lake was telling the truth. My phone buzzed non-stop, calls, texts, alerts, but I ignored them all. Only one camera mattered now, the drone I had stationed above the dam, recording every second of the unveiling. This was the proof. The reckoning. The flood. 40%. 35%. The boat docks were stranded. Jet skis and yachts tilted like broken toys in the mud. The swimming beach had become a barren wasteland. Still the water dropped. Still more secrets surfaced, more slabs, more pilings, more evidence of theft. That's when the vehicles began arriving. First, a lone security guard in a golf cart, barking into his radio. Then, more guards, followed by men in suits. A resort management, no doubt. And then, in a spray of gravel, Victoria's white Mercedes screamed to a stop. She emerged like some fallen angel of wrath, cloaked in fury and a designer suit. Preston climbed out behind her, pale and tight-lipped. Then Ava Paida, probably tracking the drone feed and rushing here to back me up legally. And behind them, half the hoverboard, drawn like moths to the spectacle of their lake vanishing before their eyes, Victoria stalked forward. "What the hell do you think you're doing? What have you done?" Victoria screamed, her polished Phi-tilde section 8 finally cracking. "Do you have any idea what this will cost? The lawsuits, the damages?" But I wasn't listening. Not anymore. My eyes were locked on the receding water linear, on what it was revealing. There, half sunken in the muddy lake, lay the unmistakable evidence of recent construction: concrete mixers, tire tracks preserved in silt, unopened bundles of building materials still in waterproof wrapping, and worst of all, a sign, half buried but legible: Phase 4 expansion authorized by V. Davenport, Community Development Officer. "That's not flood damage, Victoria," I said, raising my voice so the gathering crowd could hear. "That's the truth surfacing. That's karma." Each inch of falling water exposed another lie. Ava stepped forward, calm and authoritative, holding up legal documents. "Mr. Hayes is performing a state-mandated dam inspection," she announced. "Authorized underwater rights regulations dating back to 1958. The temporary reduction in lake level is fully within his rights as the registered operator." She turned to the assembled crowd, voices buzzing around us. "What's being revealed appears to be widespread illegal construction on protected land. I'll be filing complaints with the state attorney general by this afternoon." Victoria's face shifted from red to chalk white. Her eyes darted from the uncovered foundations to the pointing fingers, the cameras, the whispering residents. Preston stood nearby, refusing to meet her gaze. Then she did something I didn't expect as she smiled, not with warmth but with cold calculation. A gambler who still believed she had an ace up her sleeve. "You think this is a win?" she said quietly. "You've just destroyed the economic foundation of this entire town. Every business that depends on lake tourism, every family that works at the resort, you've ruined them." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice in a practiced performance. "This man has sabotaged your prosperity out of personal spite, all because of some old grudge over a bridge. Ask yourselves, who's really hurting you here?" But her words didn't land the way they once did. People weren't looking at me, they were looking at her. And at the sign with her forged credentials. Samionia Roger from the hardware store, I think, called out, "That why my taxes tripled? So you could build a private kingdom on public land?" A wave of muttering followed. It had an edge now, anger, not fear. "How much of our HOA dues paid for your resort?" Janet Chen demanded. "How many families did you drive out to do this?" Voices rose faster, louder, more relentless. The tide had turned. For years, Victoria ruled through intimidation and silence. But with her crimes laid bare in mud and concrete, fear had given way to fury. She tried to regain control, but it was too late. The dam had broken, literally and metaphorically. And when someone started live streaming or adding commentary about the illegal builds, the exposed evidence as she finally saw the scope of her mistake. This wasn't just local anymore. This was public. Preston, she barked, get the lawyers. All of them. We need injunctions. Emergency filings are now. But Preston didn't budge. Hands in his pockets, eyes on the ruins of what she'd built. He looked almost a broken bar peaceful. No, Mother, he said softly. I'm done enabling this. Uncle Timothy was right about you. The silence that followed was stunning. Victoria stared at her son like he'd slapped her. Then, without another word, she turned, stormed to her Mercedes, and sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a very angry neighborhood. I glanced at the gauge. 30%. Exactly what the inspection protocol required. The lake would remain at this level for 72 hours, long enough for everything hidden beneath to be fully documented. Long enough for the world to see what Victoria Davenport had built her empire on. Silas placed a hand on my shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. He always said the truth floats, just needed someone brave enough to let it rise. The morning sun lit up the scars in the lake, mattered the skeletons of families she'd buried under lies and water. Well, the water remembered its original course, and sometimes, that's all the justice you need. The only question now was whether the authorities would act, or if Victoria still had the power to slip away once more. But judging by the crowd, by the sea of phones filming everything, by Preston standing firm, I suspected her reign was finally done. The flood had stripped away her pride, but it hadn't brought justice. Not yet. That's when I opened the anonymous envelope. It had arrived at dawn, slipped under my door with no return address, no markings, just my name written in sharp block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a note. She destroyed my family. Time for the world to know the truth. APD Preston Davenport. Her own son had just handed me the keys to detonate her empire. I plugged the drive into my laptop, fingers trembling. What opened was staggering. 2 decades of organized corruption, a folder after folder, methodically labeled by date and target. The Hendersons are driven out by fraudulent Leannes. The Nyans are evicted through fabricated code violations. The Johnsons who had their water rights stolen via forged deeds. Family after family, systematically destroyed. But the crown jewel, a folder labeled county officials, screenshots of wire transfers, secret recordings, email chains dripping with coded payoffs. Judge Patterson, $50,000 for favorable rulings. Commissioner Brooks, monthly consulting fees in exchange for permit approvals. Sheriff Martinez, retainer to look the other way. The corruption was industrial in scale, and at the root of the directoria a video file. I clicked. Preston appeared on screen, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but resolute. If you're watching this, I finally found the courage my father never used. Everything here is real. Every payment, every document, every victim. I helped her build this empire of lies. I watched it crush people who didn't deserve it. I can't live with it anymore. Do what you have to. Just keep my name out of the headlines. I've already lost one parent to hair greed. He looked down, then back into the camera. Burn it down. And just like that, I knew. The final drop had been released, and the real flood was just beginning. I reminded myself not to lose focus, and not now. The emergency community meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the town center. What Victoria didn't realize was that Ava had arranged for it to be live-streamed on the county's public access channel, citing an obscure clause in the HOA bylaws requiring public visibility for all emergency sessions. By 6:45, the place was overflowing. The exposed foundations from the lake had caught fire across local media. Reporters from 3 neighboring counties lined the walls, and cameras were trained on every angle. Thanks to some well-placed social media posts, nearly half the crowd were former residents or people Victoria had pushed out, now returned to witness her reckoning. Victoria entered at exactly 7 o'clock. Clad in a sharp red suit, flanked by a wall of attorneys, she moved like a queen still clinging to her throne. But I saw the cracks of the subtle tremble in her hand, the flickers of unease in her eyes, the tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, stepping up to the podium without being asked. "I know there's been some misunderstanding about the recent water situation. I'm here tonight to set the record straight." But Ava was already on her feet. "Point of order, Madam President," she said clearly. "This is an emergency session called by the homeowners and not the board. You don't set the agenda tonight." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Someone had already gone live on their phone. "I saw the view account jump a 300-day broken bar 500-day broken bar 1000. Ava continued, pulling out a heavy folder. "We have evidence here, evidence of systematic fraud, document forgery, and illegal construction on public property. Evidence implicating not only this HOA board, but also multiple county officials, in an ongoing criminal conspiracy." Victoria's lawyers began to object, but the crowd drowned them out. These people had been silenced for too long. Tonight, they'd be heard. I stepped up to the microphone, heart racing but voice steady. "3 weeks ago, the HOA destroyed a bridge my grandfather built. That act sent me down a road that uncovered far more than just property damage. It exposed corruption that reaches through the core of this community." Behind me, Ava began the slideshow presentation. Slide by slide, it built a damning narrative here: the forged maintenance agreements, the fake permits, the illegal construction that had only come to light when the lake was drained. Each image, each document, struck like a hammer blow. The room grew quieter, tension mounting. "But what we found isn't the full extent," I said. "This morning, someone with direct knowledge of these crimes gave us more, much more." Ava clicked to the next slide. Bank transfers appeared on the screen. The crowd gasped. $50,000 from Victoria Davenport to Judge Patterson. I read aloud, labeled as a consulting fees. Unusual, considering he's a sitting judge. Another slide, Sheriff Martinez receiving $5,000 a month for so-called a security consulting. And those payments always coincided with citizen complaints against the HOA being dismissed. The live stream count exploded to 5,000 a broken bar 10,000 a broken bar. The chat was a blur of outrage and disbelief. Local TV stations, originally recording for later news broadcasts, switched to live coverage. This was no longer a meeting. This was a public trial. Victoria suddenly stood, voice sharp and high-pitched. "This is slander. These documents are fake. I'll sue every single person in this room." But her voice broke on the last word because the next slide held something she couldn't deny. Her own voice. Crystal clear. "Patterson won't be a problem. I own that fat bastard. 50 grand, and he'll rule however I want. The Hayes property, it'll be ours by spring." The room erupted. People shouted, pointed. Someone screamed, "Criminal." Another voice echoed, 20 years of theft. Reporters surged forward, bombarding her with questions. The live stream chat was now a torrent of shock and vindication. The sirens. Not the local sheriff. He was compromised. These were state police, called by someone who'd been watching the stream. They entered swiftly, badges out, eyes scanning. The lead officer approached Victoria. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and violation of public trust." Her lawyers tried to protest, but the tide had turned. The evidence was overwhelming and, most importantly, it was public. As they read her rights, Victoria's composure finally disintegrated. She lunged toward me, screaming, "You destroyed everything. 20 years Saruinda for what? A stupid bridge?" Officers restrained her, but she kept shouting, "You don't know what you've done. The job's lost. The revenue gone. You've killed this town out of petty revenge." The crowd stepped aside as she was led away, handcuffed. Cameras captured every second of the fall of Victoria Davenport in real time. The live stream ticker read 23,000 viewers and climbing. The hashtag back and forth down was already trending. As the chaos slowly settled, people began approaching me quietly, tearfully. The Hendersons, eyes wet with gratitude. The Onyans, smiling through the weight of years, whispering that they could finally return home. Family after family stepped forward to share what they'd suffered. Stories finally heard, pain finally acknowledged. An hour later, Judge Patterson was arrested at his home. Sheriff Martinez tried to flee. He made it to the county line before being caught. Commissioner Brooks turned himself in, hoping cooperation might buy him leniency. The entire corrupt network crumbled in a single evening, brought down by water, truth, and the courage of a grandson who chose justice over loyalty. The lake would be refilled, but the world it reflected would never look the same. The luxury resort, likely shut down. The HOA, dissolved. Yes, there would be economic hardship, but there would also be something far more valuable: freedom. And to me, that was worth any cost. I had defeated Victoria not for vengeance, but to honor my grandfather's legacy. And now, an investor was offering a check that could change everything. So what had I been fighting for? To preserve the past, or to cash in on the future? The check lay on my kitchen table like a question from the universe. $10 million. The offer had come through Ava's office that morning, a formal, serious, and generous. They want to build an eco-resort, she'd said, something sustainable. $10 million was more than fair. It would mean comfort, security. No more worrying about droughts or cattle markets. No more mending fences in 100-degree heat. Just freedom, bought and paid for. But as I stood at the edge of the ranch, watching the golden light of sunset ripple across the refilling lake, I already knew the answer. This land wasn't just acreage, it was memory. It was a promise. Every lesson my grandfather taught about standing firm when you're right, a broken bar. It lived here. Not for sale, I told the investor over the phone. Not for 10 million, not for 20. This land stays in the Hayes family. There was silence, then a low chuckle. I respect that, Mr. Hayes. If you ever want to partner on something that protects the land and shares it, call me. After the call, I walked to where the old bridge had once stood. Only the stone foundations remain. It is still strong after 70 years, waiting for something new. That afternoon, the word went out across every channel: bridge building dire this Saturday. Bring work gloves and willing hands. Let's rebuild together. I expected maybe a couple dozen people. I got over 300. They arrived in pickups and vans, hauling lumber, tools, and food. The Hendersons came with blueprints. The new Yens brought enough sandwiches for an army. Janet Chen's husband, a structural engineer, offered to oversee construction. Even Roger from the hardware store showed up with supplies. Figured I owe you, he muttered. Should have stood up to her years ago. Work began at dawn and didn't stop until after dark. It wasn't just construction. It was reconstruction of trust, of unity, of something Victoria had spent decades tearing apart. Children who'd never seen the original bridge passed nails to grandparents who remembered fishing from it. Even Preston Davenport came here slipping in quietly, unannounced. He didn't say a word, just picked up a hammer and started working. For a moment, the tension was thick. Then old Henderson stepped forward, handed him gloves, and said, "Past is past. Today, we build forward." Preston worked until his hands bled, until the guilt began to sweat out with every swing of the hammer. By nightfall, he wasn't Victoria's son anymore. He was just another neighbor. 3 days later, it was finished. Not just rebuilt, reborn. Wider, stronger, with benches for watching the water. A beam sealed within the structure, signed by everyone who helped. A permanent reminder of what community could accomplish. At the dedication, I raised my grandfather's old whiskey bottle and spoke. This bridge isn't just wood and nails. It's proof. Proof that what's broken can be rebuilt stronger. That community matters more than profit. That sometimes a broken bar good guys win. The applause was heartfelt. But I wasn't done. That's why I'm creating the Hayes Watershed Preserve, I announced. This ranch, this dam, these 200 acres, they'll be held in trust. No development, no hose, just protected land, for our children, for the future. The crowd erupted. The celebration lasted until midnight, to an organic outpouring of joy, of hard-earned freedom. A month later, The ripples continued. State investigations expanded across 3 counties. The scandal made national news. Victoria faced up to 40 years in prison. Her assets were being seized for restitution. The empty resort stood like a skeleton monument to her greed. But good things were rising from the ruins. Environmental groups began visiting the preserve. Local schools brought students to learn about conservation and water rights. The new bridge became a symbol, drawing visitors who'd heard the story of how one small town stood up. I was checking dam readings one morning when a black sedan pulled in our government plates. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Daniel Carter, Army Corps of Engineers." He flashed his badge, then unrolled a detailed map. "We've been studying your dam. Your grandfather's work, oh, it's remarkable. Ahead of its time." He pointed north. "Your dam doesn't just control Lake West. It impacts the whole regional watershed. During heavy floods, this system, if managed right, could prevent millions in downstream damage." Then he paused, eyes scanning the map. "We found another structure. Same engineering. Did your grandfather ever mention a secondary site?" I didn't answer right away. I was staring at something familiar. A note in my grandfather's own handwriting. "Secondary site, CJ, personal." "I might need to check some old papers," I said carefully. Carter handed me his card. "If you find anything, we're very interested." Your grandfather understood something most of us are still learning: how to manage water for everyone's good. After he left, I stood on the new bridge. Below, kids cast fishing lines into the current, laughing. Just like I had, years ago. The cycle continuing, only now, freer, cleaner. That night, I opened the old family lockbox. Inside a hidden compartment, I found more documents. Another dam, another system, and a handwritten note: "Caliber, if you're reading this, you've proven worthy of the first trust. The second is greater. Use it wisely. The water remembers everything." I looked out at the lake, full again, but changed. Victoria's empire had been swept away. But my grandfather's legacy, a broken bar that was just beginning. Tomorrow, I'd investigate the second site. Tonight, I dressed. The battle was over. The community was whole again, and the bridge stood strong in the moonlight, a testament to what people can build when they stop being afraid. The stranger was gone, but his question lingered in the air like mist. Had I simply unleashed justice, a broken bar, or something far more powerful than a flood? Let me know if you want this compiled as a full, formatted script, or if you'd like a voiceover style narration for video.